What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Factory Tour. I'm your host, Paul Patterson. I'm joined today by my friend Mike, better known as Dynasty Zoltan. He's here to help me break down all of the chaos that was week one of the NFL season. I'm still trying to catch my breath. I feel like there's 1,000 things that happened, and we're going to try to talk about as many as we can today, the most important ones, the most actionable ones. But honestly, I'm counting on Mike to really help me fill in some of the blanks here because there's just a lot of stuff to decode and to break down. So, how are you feeling after week one?
Honestly, not great. Like, it was a weird week of football. I think it's tough when a weird week like this happens week one because it's the only sample size that we have, right? So you want to end up reading way too much into it. But the truth is that until about week 5 or 6, preseason ADP is more predictive of season long points than the first 4 weeks is. So until we get to week 5, stick to your priors a little bit. But that being said, there's a lot of actionable info that we can take. It involves diving into the numbers and the details and the film a little bit more, but that's what we're here for.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Is just not overreacting to a 1 week sample because when weird stuff happens, like you said, in the middle of the season, it's a lot easier to write it off when we have a longer track record of players performing in certain roles, doing certain things week in and week out. I think one of the biggest red herrings this week, and we'll come back to this throughout the show, I think, is just play volume. You look at in a 1 week sample, you have these games that can be super condensed, like the Falcons Panthers game, very low play volume. And then you have games like the Rams Seahawks, where the Rams just ran a million plays. The Patriots, too. I think they had like 58 dropbacks. So you're going to look at player versus player. It's going to be a huge disparity in some cases because you have players running twice as many routes or playing twice as many snaps as other players. And that's going to create some real discrepancies that probably won't hold up to that degree over the course of the season.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And that's one of the key things that I like to look at is especially early in the season, you need to be looking at rate statistics and efficiency and things like that a lot more than looking at some of these totals. Cause like you said, there are teams who had 78 plays and there are teams who had under 50 plays, even some within the same game. I think it was the Falcons game where the Panthers ran 72 plays and the Falcons ran 48. So there's big disparities here that are very important.
Yeah. Like you said, there was some negative stuff week one, but we're gonna try to keep the vibes good to
All
start the
right.
show. We're gonna get out here on a high note, and I actually want to go ahead and ignore everything you said about 1 week samples and things, not really being predictive of the whole season. I want to just go ahead and take some way too early victory laps. Um, Players that you had a stance on, and that stance looks wildly correct after week one, and we don't even care what happens the rest of the way. We are going to go ahead and just bank this W right now. And I'll get us started with a guy who I was really into this offseason as a buy in Dynasty, a guy that I was high on for seasonal, and that's Calvin Ridley,
Yep.
who came out this year or this week, posted almost a 35% target share, just looked so natural in the Jaguars offense, instant connection with Trevor Lawrence. I was fading any narratives about target competition, and I was just looking back on what Ridley did in 2020 and how dominant he was when he finished as the wide receiver 4. And I'm thinking this guy is still in his prime age range. He's not even coming back from an injury. He should be good to go. He made highlight plays throughout camp. And then we see it on the field week one. I think he's going to be a serious piece for dynasty teams this year, and people that bought into him and got him low, bought him low when he was suspended, are going to be kind of creating some sort of super teams here, built basically creating a wide receiver 1 out of nothing.
Yeah, I have him on a lot of teams where I was punting last year because he cost what, like a basically 11th round startup pick or a second round, random second round future rookie pick. And you're cashing in on that now. I did some polls already based on this one game. Calvin Ridley is more valuable than Devontae Adams. He is almost as valuable as T. Higgins. He's more valuable than Drake London. I wouldn't say I'm surprised by this, honestly. What I was surprised by is when I did my projections and it came out that I did have Calvin Ridley as a top 6 wide receiver. So I was surprised 2 weeks ago when I finalized my projections and that came up, but I'm not surprised by this week one performance. He had 45% of the air yards in the game. And he really took Christian Kirk off the field. Christian Kirk only played on 1 out of 11 snaps in 12 in 2 wide receiver personnel. So this is
Yeah.
Ridley's team. Christian Kirk is not a threat to his target share, and neither is Zay Jones. I expect him to continue to dominate.
Yeah, he should end up having one of the higher target shares, I think, this season. And he's obviously in an ascending offense, high
Yep.
volume of pass attempts. So there's a perfect storm for just high end fantasy production. I did have kind of a sad realization about Ridley on Sunday. I was surfing through my player exposures on my dynasty teams, just kind of seeing, how I was doing. And I had this memory of having a bunch of Ridley shares, like trading for a lot of them. And then I checked my exposure and it was way lower than I thought. And
Huh.
I went back and I realized that I had ended up leaving some leagues, or some leagues like folded, and those were all the leagues that I had Ridley in that I bought him last year. And so it was kind of upsetting, but I'm still taking my victory lap because I've been talking about him on this show all off season. And I hope that if you're listening, you have some Ridley that you can enjoy. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, why don't you go
Sorry,
ahead
go
and
ahead.
give us one of yours?
Yeah, so my next guy, and sorry to steal yours, but I have the same guy on my list, and that's going to be Nico Collins. I've been a huge Nico Collins fan for a long time. I'm up to about 40% ownership of Nico. Part of it's the Michigan bias. Part of it is just he's a really good player. He didn't have any good quarterbacks at Michigan, and he had an awesome week one. I think he's a great fit with CJ Stroud. And despite the fact that he only ran 72% of the routes, he had a 31% targets per route run. That's basically the same as Calvin Ridley. And he had 61% of the air yards. Now, Houston's probably not going to be a good team. They're probably not going to be an explosive offense, but they're going to be playing from behind a lot. And Nico has the size, athleticism, and I would argue talent of a guy who could be, a fantasy wide receiver too, and the wide receiver one for this Texans team. So I'm all in on Nico at this point. I think he's in that next tier below the Jahan Dotson type of the young wide receivers you want to invest in.
Yeah, I don't mind you stealing it at all. I'll just piggyback off of that and say, Nico was one of my highest drafted guys in best ball this year. I think I got him in basically every startup I did this offseason. It was Jacob Sanderson really was the one who got me on and pointing out some of his rate stats last year in the games he was healthy. He was just very quietly a productive wide receiver who was demanding targets even with Brandon Cooks on the field. And now he's really seeming to come into his own in this offense. So very excited to see him, and looks like a guy that you can start pretty much every week. He's not going to necessarily get 11 targets every week because they're not going to throw over 50 passes or 50 dropbacks, but he's a guy you can definitely flex. And based on, what his price was, I think that's a huge win. I'll come back and just give my last victory lap guy.
Yep.
And I'm sure this is going to be another one that we're on the same page, and that's Breece Hall. I never was out on Breece Hall. I really wasn't too worried about the injury, but I can't say that I expected him to look this good this early in the season. I was hammering him fourth, fifth round in best ball. I was trading for him in all builds, contending, rebuilding in dynasty, but I didn't think he was going to go for over 20 yards on his first 3 touches.
Yeah.
It was just, I couldn't even believe what I was watching when every time he touched the ball, it was 20, 30, 50 yards. I was like, what is going on? I don't know if the Bills defense is just an absolute disaster, or if Breece Hall is just that guy, but I tend to believe it's the latter. He's obviously being eased back in, still splitting a lot of work with Dalvin Cook, but I do believe that he's going to pull away sooner than later. And he's really easy to picture as a late season superstar kind of guy you need this year.
Yeah, I mean, Dalvin Cook, it took him 13 he got over his 30-yard mark on his 13th carry. Breece Hall got over that mark on his I guess almost got to that mark on his first 3 carries. There were reports before the game he was going to handle less of a workload. I immediately put out, it doesn't matter. He was the most efficient running back in the NFL last year. He started the season being that guy again. I'm not worried about him getting chased down on that long run. I'm pretty happy that he beat 3 guys on the way there, and he didn't have the angle anyways. I was seeing some random stuff about that, but he is healthy, even if he's only at 95%. The fact that he looks like this at 95% just means I think he's the best running back in the NFL. I'm just going to say that now. I don't think there's any running back better than Breece Hall, and he's in his second year. So to me, I forgot about Bijan. It's going to be close between those two. I apologize.
He's up there.
I forgot it. He's up there, but I'm all in on Breece for sure.
Yeah, he's looking like a great buy if you got him at any kind of discount, and somebody you don't have to play gross backup running backs over. You can just keep playing him and just keep hoping for those explosive plays until the volume really comes in.
I'm curious because I know you were in on Jahmyr Gibbs as well.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far into Jahmyr Gibbs now. Maybe we can do that later. But right now, Breece Hall and Jahmyr Gibbs are pretty close. I think you could pretty easily add maybe a second and a third swap or a late second to go from Gibbs to Breece Hall. Is that a price you're willing to do?
Honestly, I figured that this comparison was going to come up at some point, and I thought about it, and I did not come to a conclusion. I think I
Okay.
just kind of have them in the same tier, and like I'm not really adding to either one to get the other right now. I'm a big believer in both guys, so I think I'm just gonna ride it out and see what happens.
Fair enough.
Yeah, why don't you give us another early victory lap to close us out in this segment?
Yeah, so apologize. I missed the let's start with the good stuff memo. I'm going to victory lap on a guy I was fading. George Pickens is just not a very good receiver. He's not a guy who's ever going to be a dominant fantasy receiver. I know the one-handed catches look cool, especially when they're in practice or training camp. But ultimately, he just hasn't shown an ability to earn targets at any level. Deontay Johnson missed the second half of the game, and George Pickens still only had a 14% target share. That was lower than Allen Robinson. He had a lower targets per route run than Calvin Austin, who came in for Deontay Johnson in the second half. Kenny Pickett's a problem, but George Pickens just isn't that guy everyone wants him to be. I'm not saying you should do this from a value perspective, but I think it's likely that Nico Collins outscores George Pickens rest of season.
Yeah, look, it's not good for George Pickens, but it's certainly good for you.
Yeah.
In your takes and the people following you that were fading George Pickens. I definitely agree. I haven't been high on him. I've always been kind of team Deontay. Bummer that he's going to be missing a few weeks, but yeah, I mean, we pretty much saw it, right? This game is just one game, but it does sort of carry over from last year where Pickens is not going to be a dominant target earner. He frankly just isn't in that type of role. And the team doesn't seem interested in using him in that type of role. So we'll keep monitoring it, see if anything changes now that they have a week to prepare without Deontay. But yeah, I mean, it certainly isn't looking good for the price that you had to pay for him. It seemed like he was always one of the worst bets in that tier of wide receivers that he was going in all offseason. So that is one I can agree with as well. We're going to move on to our next segment here. I'm going to keep the show moving at a pretty brisk pace so we can get to lots of players. And this segment, we're just calling this the real deal. So these are guys that had strong week one performances that we are willing to buy into, that we think are repeatable and not, flukes. And I'll let you start this one out. Who is somebody that really showed out in week one that you think is the real deal?
For me, it's Chris Olave. He had another game where he just dominated the Saints in targets. He was also incredibly productive. I believe that Chris Olave is the only wide receiver other than Michael Thomas to have at least 40 yards in his first 16 career games. I believe that's the stat. Apologies if I'm not remembering it exactly correctly. But Olave just put up 30% target rate, 35% air yard share. He's just an incredible receiver. I'm toying with putting him above Garrett Wilson following this Aaron Rodgers news. I think he's just as talented of a player as Wilson is, and Olave is a guy. He's just that guy.
I was preaching all offseason that the gap between Wilson and Olave in startups was too broad. Early second versus late second in a startup is a huge difference. That's like almost a first worth of value. And I don't know if it was necessarily borne out in actual existing leagues, but I definitely thought that they should be really close together. And there was too much of a gap based on the quarterback play. And now, that's out the window. The quarterback play is going to be far worse in New York. And Olave's just doing his thing. It's funny because I was having trouble kind of following all the games. I had some stuff going on. And on Sunday, and I wrote down after the first quarter, Michael Thomas had 3 targets, and I wrote down where's Chris Olave ? Just to come back around to it. And then I come back in the fourth quarter, I'm like, oh, there he is. He's doing his thing. There he is. He's having a great game. He is absolutely the real deal. He kind of crept up into that second round of ADP and best ball for seasonal leagues, and it's looking like a good pick. The talent just wins out in these cases, and he is definitely talented. Another guy that I think is really talented, who didn't quite get the love that he deserved this offseason, was Travis Etienne. I'll admit, I even had a little bit of fear with Travis Etienne that we weren't really going to get the full package with him, that he wasn't going to turn into the guy that he was maybe billed to be. I thought his dynasty price was fine, but not really a guy I was aggressively going after, because I thought there were, downside risks with the pass catching work specifically. But he is not currently in a timeshare with Tank Bigsby. He is a
No.
full blown bell cow, 80% snap share, 15.6% target share, which is a career high. And he played incredibly well. I mean, he didn't give the coaches any reason to want to lower his workload. He had a big explosive run for a touchdown. He was awesome. And I think this, maybe not this level of like 80% snaps will continue, but this trend of him getting most of the touches and maybe getting these passing downs, I do think that's going to continue, and he could end up paying off in a big way.
Yeah, listen, he was fifth among running backs this week in terms of expected fantasy points. One of those guys above him was Deion Jackson, so let's just say he was fourth. ETN was absolutely dominant. He looked really good again. I think he's a really good player, and it was evaluated in the 4th round of startups. I was right there with you.
Yeah, how about another real deal player?
So my guy who I'm going to say is the real deal is a little bit more under the radar. It's Demario Douglas. He's a guy that is honestly one of my favorite players in fantasy right now. I think he is an unbelievable buy. For those that don't know, because he's, let's just be real, it's Demario Douglas. He is a 6th round pick out of Liberty. He's a slot receiver for the Patriots. What I love about him, he's incredibly shifty. He's basically discount Zay Flowers if you want to think about what type of player he is. And he came out in his first game as a 6th round rookie. He had equal amounts of routes run as Juju Smith-Schuster. They each had about 50%. He had 7 targets and he had 83 air yards. He's being used a lot more vertically than Juju, who only had 29 air yards on his 7 targets. I expect over the course of the season, Douglas is going to take this role from Juju. I think he is the next great Patriots slot receiver. You can still get him for a 3rd round pick. I would have, not if you're in a league with me, but otherwise you might be able to. I think he's the future 80 to 90 catch guy.
That's an interesting one. I definitely have heard his name floating around. I kind of missed the boat. I'm not sure if I have any shares of Douglas, but that's a big prediction. For him to
it's
break
not
out.
too late. That's it. That's what I'll say. It's not too late. Like I still think he is an unbelievable value.
Yeah, I always do have trouble buying in on day 3 wide receivers, especially small school. It is tough, but I mean, the fact that you're on him definitely makes me feel better about him. I think that the numbers from this past week's game can be a little deceptive because I think the Patriots led the league in dropbacks this week, so everybody's a little bit inflated. But I mean, for a day 3 rookie in his first game, that's still really good. And apparently, Juju's knee is going to explode any day now, so he could see his snap share increase. And Kayshon Boutte might play himself off the field, in short order. So. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some positive signals there. I might have to go and look. Crazy that he wasn't actually the best day 3 wide receiver in week 1.
Definitely a guy we need to talk about.
Just a weird year. Yeah, we will definitely get there.
Yeah.
Not 100% sure yet if he's the real deal, so we'll save Puka for a little bit later, but we'll be getting to him. I'm going to talk about another rookie wide receiver, though, which is Zay Flowers, who I know is a receiver you were notoriously low on this offseason. I was sort of middling on him. I thought his profile was fine. I wasn't like blown away by it, but I didn't think it was so bad that he wasn't worth like a 109 pick. And I ended up picking him there a few times because I just had the 109 and nobody wanted it. So I got some Flowers. And I mean, I can't say I expected anything like what we saw on Sunday. He was immediately featured in the offense, full-time player. Bateman was relegated to a part-time role. He's still nursing the injury, but Zay and Odell were the full-time receivers. And Zay Flowers had a 47% target share, which isn't even the craziest part because the fantasy points data suite has this stat called first read percentage. And Zay was by far number 1 in the NFL in first read percentage this week. He was at 60% first read on a passing play. So AJ Brown was actually second, down at 47%, followed by Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Stephon Diggs.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Sorry, because I was going to bring up the same stat as a negative, and we might as well get to my thoughts on Zay Flowers. First of all, I was too low. I was too low on him. Like this isn't take lock. Definitely was lower than I should have been on him. That being said, when you are the first read on 60% of the targets and your average depth of target is under 3 yards, that screams that you are having manufactured plays for you. And the offense of the Ravens was not moving very well. They didn't have Mark Andrews there. It's great that they could use Zay Flowers as a guy who could get those manufactured touches and do a lot after the catch. I'm not saying that that's bad. However, I think in a more typical game, I think in a more normal offense, I'm not sure that we're going to see this massive breakout from Zay Flowers. I still think he's a little gadgety for now. And listen, Deebo Samuel gadgeted his way to a top 5 season, but I want to pump the brakes a little bit on Zay Flowers. And I actually think that first read number is a negative for him.
You heard it here first. Zoltan does not think the 47% target share will continue. Hot stuff here on the Factory Tour podcast.
State my name on it.
I kind of think when you're at the top of a list with AJ Brown, Devontae Adams, and Stephon Diggs right behind you, that's usually a good thing. But I totally hear your point.
It's fair.
It definitely was a little bit gimmicky. I just think the overwhelming amount of volume like outweighs the way that he got the volume and the fact that it was his first game. I think it's far more positive than negative, but for sure, let's not get carried away and say he's a top 12 dynasty wide receiver. Let's not trade him. Let's not trade Drake London for him. For goodness sake, I saw that poll on Twitter. We love the week 1 of reactions. But that being said, I'm moving him up. I actually have already traded for him in a league. Okay. My only in-season trade so far. I traded. It's a start 9 league, so it's a little shallower lineup. So I don't mind consolidating a lot. So I traded Rashid Shaheed, a 24-2, a 24-3, and a 25-2 for Flowers.
I think it's totally reasonable to have Zay Flowers in the back half of a wide receiver 2. So currently the wide receiver 18 through 20 is Christian Watson, Jordan Addison, DJ Moore, and then Quentin Johnston's right there. I think putting Zay Flower, I'd have him at the bottom of that tier, but I think he belongs in it.
I'd take him over DJ Moore in a heartbeat.
Me too. To be clear, for me, it's Watson, Addison, and Johnston, and I would put Flowers with those 3.
Yeah, that seems totally reasonable. I'm probably willing to put him over Johnston already, but I think it's kind of like a safety thing, I guess. But I totally see the upside with Johnston. But I think Flowers with his role already and Johnston still getting ramped up, I think the value for Flowers could just kind of continue to rise, but it depends what he does in these upcoming weeks. Either way, I think he's the real deal. I think he's going to be a guy you can start throughout the season and not necessarily expect this, but usable production, which is great for a guy that was going, at very affordable prices in rookie drafts and dynasty startups this offseason. Did we get through all of them, or did you have one more?
Yeah, I have one more. The others we're going to address later. The other one I want to talk about here was Anthony Richardson. I thought he had a really good week 1. I thought he looked really comfortable in the pocket, which I know has been one of his skills. He only threw the right side, which was a little concerning, but given how raw he was supposed to look, I thought he looked better than that. So I just think his dynasty value was approved, essentially. Where he was being drafted makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. He played way better than I expected. I had this for later, but we'll just talk about it now. I was really amazed at how the Colts handled him and like letting him throw. They had a 70% pass rate. I know it was a negative game script, but still, for a guy like that type of a prospect, I think that's very forward-thinking coaching, and it makes me feel like a lot better about how he's going to be used and how he's going to be developed. And like you said, he looked more comfortable than I would have thought. I think he had a 65% completion percentage. He wasn't necessarily chucking it deep, but still really good stuff to see in his first game.
And it was good to see him get Josh Downs involved. The Colts actually took the lead in the third quarter, so while it was a slightly negative game script, I mean, they're playing the Jaguars, a lot of people's favorite for the South this year. So all in all, a really good opening game for Anthony Richardson. And he's the type of player that if he's good enough to keep a starting job, he's going to be a very good fantasy player.
Yeah. I mean, I'd go so far as to say that I'd rather have Anthony Richardson than Justin Fields in Dynasty right now.
I am close. What we've seen rushing from Justin Fields is on a different planet of Anthony Richardson. I would say that I would rather have Richardson than Fields in real life right now. I would say that.
Yeah. I think those two things kind of go hand in hand right now, because
you're right.
I just think with Fields, it's like, if he doesn't show like significant progression as a passer this year, and he already like hasn't, like he looked terrible in week 1, but if he doesn't show serious progression, his dynasty value is not going to hold. Whereas with Richardson, he's already kind of given us proof of concept, and I don't really think he's going down no matter what happens like this whole season. So, and I think the production can be similar, because we just saw with Richardson, like he rushed 10 times, he had a rushing touchdown, They let him throw the ball. They're not going to baby him. So I feel like the production could be close enough, and Richardson's just so much safer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like him a lot. Those are guys that I'm definitely into rest of the way. Guys you can go buy with confidence, I think. But we are going to try to balance things out a little bit in this next segment. We took our early victory laps. We're going to go ahead and throw out some instant cold takes as well. Not necessarily taking, the whole L, giving up defeat, but things that we're considering that we might be wrong on, look likely that we're wrong on. And I'm just going to go ahead and give you a quote from the great Nick Miller. If you've never watched New Girl, it's like my favorite show.
Yep.
He said, "Do I regret it? Yes. Will I do it again? Probably." And that's my philosophy with this. These are not necessarily process L's where I think the process was wrong, but I think that we're going to end up holding the bag in this case. And I'll start out with Nick Chubb. Well, two players together that are kind of the same situation. So Nick Chubb and Kenneth Walker both.
Okay.
I was very encouraged with their usage in week one. And by encouraged, I mean discouraged because I don't have them on any of my teams. But, we saw Nick Chubb, who the big knock on him for me is like he doesn't get the passing down work. I didn't believe it was going to happen this year just because Kareem Hunt was gone. But he got a 14% target share in what was an incredibly positive game script. I mean, they blew out the Bengals. They were never losing. And yet he still had 4 receptions. That's just not something he does often. And maybe it's an anomaly, but it's pretty telling that he was able to get those catches after they spent the offseason talking about how they were going to let him play more on third down. They wanted to get him involved in the passing game. If he can pair that type of receiving work with 18, 19, 20 carries a game, he does have that top 3 upside that he's lacked in past seasons.
Yeah, I agree there. I had him 6th in my projections, which was, I guess, even a little bit low. I don't mind him at all in the top 5. I mean, he had a really good opening week. For me, it's an easy one as far as a cold take, and that's Sky Moore. What a terrible performance. I think it was amplified by the fact it was the first game of the year, but he had a target rate under 10%. I mean, he didn't get targeted until late in the third quarter. He didn't look particularly good when he was targeted. I mean, it was similar stuff as last year where Mahomes was a little bit high or a little bit behind him. They just don't look like they have that chemistry down. The only good news is he wasn't as bad as Kadarius Toney. I feel worse about starting Sky Moore in a bunch of leagues week 1 than I do about owning him. I still think he has some hope of being a flex option, maybe, but yeah, I that was awful. I have very little to defend myself there.
So a little peek behind the curtain. I actually put Sky Moore on the show sheet for Mike in this spot before I even sent it to him with a little smiley face next to it. And look, I was a little bit in on Sky Moore too. I haven't been buying him too aggressively in Dynasty, but I was drafting him in best ball. I thought that he was worth the price of admission. I will push back. I don't think that this game was a worse indicator for Toney than for Sky Moore. I think Kadarius Toney played worse, but I don't think it was worse for his outlook moving forward. I think his targets per out run was I think it was very positive that he was getting so much work on a limited routes basis. And whether he gets hurt again, he probably will. But the fact that he was still kind of getting ramped up from that injury, even after missing so much time, and it was him getting the targets, I think that's a good sign. Maybe he loses them because of how bad he played, but I kind of tend to doubt it because they just don't have other options. So I think he'll actually be okay.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there. And I'm all about looking at the usage, and I love looking at target share. He had 5 targets on 11 routes run. That's, Zay Flowers-esque. The issue is that he was so bad. I'm becoming convinced he's just not a good football player at all. Like, I still think Sky could be a good football player. I don't think that Kadarius Toney is a good football player. I think he's probably out of the NFL by 2025. I think he's probably off the Chiefs roster by the trade deadline. I just don't think he's a good football player.
I think that's entirely possible. I just, I think there's reason to believe Sky Moore also might not be a good football player, just in
absolutely
ways.
Fair. Absolutely fair.
So I would not be buying either player personally. I mean, if it's like dead cheap, like a 4th round pick, that's fine. I'm not interested in chasing either of these guys. I'd rather buy good football players.
How about J.K. Dobbins or either of these Chiefs receivers?
If I need, I don't know. If I need, like, if I'm shallow in the wide receiver room and I'm just like, I need like a wing and a prayer, sure, I'll take a warm body and see what happens. I guess I would trade Dobbins. Otherwise, I'd rather just get a draft pick or put him on my IR and see if he gets any kind of positive buzz ever.
Yep.
Like he might be worth a second round pick again at some point. If you look at like Cam Akers, you look at James Robinson. I don't have a lot of hope, but Sky Moore could be literally droppable in like 2 weeks in Dynasty.
Yep.
So it's hard to really want to put my eggs in that basket. So that's a good one. I think that's a cold take. I just realized that I forgot to talk about the second player that I tagged onto mine, which was Kenneth Walker. Like I said, similar to the Chubb thing, I just didn't think he was going to get quite the level of opportunity share that he did. But he saw 74% of the Seahawks running back opportunities in week 1. He had a 20% target share, which is, I mean, that's really, really high for any running back, but that's well outside of what we saw from him last year. Charbonnet was pretty irrelevant in this game, and he's a rookie. He'll be ramped up, but this really seems like Walker's backfield to kind of hold on to. Similar to Travis Etienne, it's just I didn't expect him to be able to carve out this kind of a passing game role, so I wasn't really investing in him, and that's looking like it could be a mistake.
I don't have a lot to add. I was super in on Walker. I was happy to see that Charbonnet was barely involved, even though I like Charbonnet as well. I just think Walker is an elite running back, so I was happy to see that the Seahawks made the right decision, at least for now, and as long as Walker plays like he did on Sunday, I think he's going to keep the job.
Yeah, he looked good for sure. And that was in a game where the Seahawks as a whole looked terrible. So he definitely has potential to score a lot more points when they can kind of get things figured out. Cool. Well, we're moving along at a good pace here. We're going to get into our next segment, which is called Pump the Brakes. It's kind of the opposite of the real deal where we're buying into those week 1 performances. These are some positive performances from week 1 that we're a little bit slower to buy into. We're not really all in on these guys, even though they showed us some things we like to see. And for me, front and center, number 1 is Rashid Shaheed. And honestly, I'm willing to be convinced otherwise. I don't really know if he's a guy you have a strong take on. He was a UDFA, I believe, who kind of just came out of nowhere last year. He had some fancy efficiency stats, kind of like we saw from Deontay Hardy, formerly Deontay Harris, in this same offense like several years ago, where he didn't really get to run any routes, but when he did, he was super efficient. It was like, is this real? Is he actually good? I don't know. But Shaheed came out. He had kind of that third wide receiver spot locked up. He caught 5 of 6 targets for 89 yards and a touchdown. And I mean, it was a great game for him. 18% target share. I guess I'm just skeptical this is ever going to be a player you want to start. I just think with Olave and Thomas in that offense, plus Kamara coming back, I just think it's going to be too much of a target squeeze. And he's going to be a guy that you hold with this idea of potential, but you never actually play. And so I'm kind of pumping the brakes on Shaheed.
I understand pumping the brakes, and I wouldn't say I'm all in, but I'm a little bit more cautiously optimistic than you are, I think. Because we've seen Michael Thomas get hurt in the past, I don't think it's out of the possibility that he gets hurt again. And
Sure.
Rashid Shaheed has been incredibly efficient. You mentioned 2.5 yards per route run, only on 34 targets last year, but that's still pretty good. Looked again this week. I think he's a pretty good player, but the minute I can get a second round pick for him, I'm trading him. So
that was literally going to be my next question. I was like,
Yeah.
Shaheed or a random second round pick. And that's where I'm at, because I think you're actually going to be getting to the point, like maybe right now, or maybe after one more decent game where you can go ahead and trade him for a second. And that's where, like, I think I'm pulling the trigger there. If I was in a best ball dynasty, which I am in several, in a best ball dynasty, I'd be a little more interested in holding on to him because I do think he'll have these spike weeks. But if I'm in a start 10, even a start 11 league, I just don't know how often I'm actually going to want to insert him into my lineup. I think he's going to be volatile. I mean, this week he had 18 yards per catch and he had like an 84% catch rate. That is not sustainable. Like, you can't, at that depth of target, you're not going to catch that many of your targets. Like, this is not going to be a regular occurrence. He's going to be outside the top 50, 60 wide receivers constantly, I think. Even if he is a good player.
I agree with you there. My guy is, listen, a lot of these metrics look pretty good. I'm talking about Michael Pittman. He had a very good week, right? He put up 24 fantasy points. He had 18 expected fantasy points, 26% target rate. He ran 98% of the routes. Obviously, the Colts threw a lot. We already talked about that. I just don't think that they're going to be a team that throws for 270 yards a game. I think it was nice what we saw from Pittman, but Josh Downs looked pretty good as well. I think Jonathan Taylor, I don't know if Jonathan Taylor's coming back. I just don't see this wide receiver 1 upside for Pittman. He's never shown it in the past. It was a really good run after catch on his touchdown, but I just don't think he's a guy who should be ranked where he is. in Dynasty where he's in a similar tier as guys like Zay Flowers, like you can probably just toss in something small. Right now, Pittman's actually one spot above Zay Flowers. Probably
Yeah.
not true anymore, but I'm fading Pittman a little bit on that week 1 performance.
I agree, especially in Dynasty. I just don't
Yeah.
think that I think he's kind of in a no man's land of wide receivers where like there's a big tier there and there's really no reason for him to be near the top of it. And like you said, the passing volume isn't really going to be there to this degree week in and week out. And even if the volume's there, we can't necessarily bank on this type of efficiency or conversion of those attempts into passing yards like we saw this week. So I think it's going to be a bumpy ride for Pittman, and he's going to have some games like this, but he's also going to have a lot of like fringe wide receiver 3 performances where he gets 5 targets. And it will be frustrating. So I agree. Definitely pumping the brakes there. I ended up with a lot of him in best ball though, because I kept wanting to click Anthony Richardson, and Pittman was kind of in a zone where I hated all the running backs. So I kept taking Pittman and then stacking him with Richardson. So I'm kind of okay with this for my portfolio, but I don't think it's going to continue week in and week out. Another guy that had a nice week 1 and kind of a surprising utilization was Kenny Gainwell, who, again, another player I was investing heavily in seasonal, but I haven't really been buying in Dynasty. I have some shares, but not a guy I was pursuing. To be honest, I didn't think he was going to get this type of workload. He played 62% of the snaps. He handled 78% of the running back opportunities. I'm just not sure that this is actually going to hold up. I think this could be a situation where he's the experienced running back on the team. They trust him. He's reliable. DeAndre Swift has been known for unreliability. And so he takes kind of a backseat early in the season. But I would, if I had to put money on it, I would think that this would pull closer to an even split over the course of the year. I think that Swift does do some things better than Gainwell, and they're going to find a way to work him in a little bit more. So I'm not buying Gainwell. I'm cool with holding him and just riding this out if you have him. But I'm not sending like a 2nd round pick for him, which is what I think it would cost. It's just not common to see a small running back like this make this sort of a usage leap in year 3. So are you with me there, or are you more optimistic on him?
I'm totally with you. He's another one of these guys I just don't think is very good. I mean, he wasn't efficient with his work. The Patriots are a very good defense, but even last year, he ranked outside the top 40 in yards after contact per attempt, elusiveness, breakaway rate, all of these statistics. He is just a jag running back that the Eagles trust at this point, and they didn't trust DeAndre Swift in a game that was honestly way closer than it should be. I know I'm a Pats fan, you're an Eagles fan. I think the Pats actually outplayed the Eagles other than the first, 3 minutes of the game. So I understand why Gainwell got that work in week 1, but he is a big sell for me. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, it's just hard to believe in. Like you said, he hasn't been an overly impressive player, and coaches' trust will only get you so far in most cases. So I think we'll see more Swift. I mean, the big surprise was Penny being inactive. I did not see that coming at all. I really thought this was going to be like a 3-way committee. Penny looked fine in the preseason, so it was surprising to see them go with Scott over him. We'll see if that continues throughout the year. Maybe he's still dealing with injury a little bit, but that was really the big factor that pushed Gainwell into more work. But I don't think it will continue. Give me another guy to pump the brakes on.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of just bring up Brandon Ayuk. I'm not even sure that I have a take on him at this point. I think he's probably just going to be overvalued because everyone who scores touchdown is overvalued. Who scores 2 touchdowns is overvalued for the next 6 days. But to me, I'm still worried about the target share. What I found amazing in San Francisco was the amount of targets concentration that they had. So 24 of the 26 attempts in this game went to the big 4 for San Francisco. Now, obviously, that is their strategy, but I don't think that can possibly keep up. I think we have bigger games coming in the future for Christian McCaffrey in the passing game. I think George Kittle's going to get more involved as he gets healthier. I think Brandon Ayuk is an excellent player, but I haven't changed my opinion that the San Francisco offense is going to be run heavy. It's not going to be particularly fast, and it's going to be spread between at least 4 players. So I don't see Ayuk being a top 12 guy this year.
I don't either. I think we've seen this before in single games. They kind of have these game plans where like one guy ends up being featured in a week. And this week it was Ayuk, but I don't necessarily think that means it will be next week. Like next week, it could be Debo with a 28% target share. It could be Kittle. I don't think that this offense is designed to just like have this is the first guy, this is the second, third, fourth guy. It's like they're playing matchups. Shanahan is very smart. He can be emotional, but he also is calculated in how he wants to use these guys, and they're all super talented. So if somebody's trying to sell Ayuk on the idea that he's going to maintain a 28% target share throughout the season, yeah, I'm not paying that price. I mean, I think his value has to go up a little bit from where it was, and it's exciting if you've been rostering him, but not a guy you can really buy because his price is out of control. I mean, I've even asked in a couple of leagues, and the one offer I got was a first, a second, and Nico Collins. That's way higher than I would pay. I'm not giving up that much. I mean, I still think he's valued pretty closely to like a base 2024 first, and I wouldn't really be looking to add much on top of that.
Yep, I agree with you there.
Yeah. Last guy I'll mention also scored 2 touchdowns this week, and that's Romeo Doubs. I don't think his value is quite jumping to the levels of Brandon Ayuk, but I do think that this is a performance that could maybe be misinterpreted. Small sample, touchdown bias a little bit, but I have to preface this and say he also was dealing with injury, so he didn't actually play all of the snaps, which is the one part of this take that could come back to bite me. Is that he wasn't like a full participant, but he did lead the wide receivers in routes. His targets per out run was high; it was like around 29%, but he wasn't efficient, and he's never been efficient. 1.5 yards per out run. His yards per reception was low. His target share was only 18.5% in a game that Christian Watson did not play. I just don't think he has a high ceiling, and he's not the type of wide receiver that I really look to roster in Dynasty unless I'm like playing in a very deep starting lineup type of league where it's like start 12 and I need at least 3 wide receivers every week or something. Then he's fine. He's kind of like a Tyler Boyd sort of guy. But if there's any kind of a bump in value based on this where you can trade him for like a second plus, I just feel like I would rather have that.
Yeah, he's the perfect guy. Getting a second's great. I also love using a guy like that to tier up, right? Like for me, I would trade Gibbs and Romeo Doubs for Breece Hall, for instance.
Yeah.
I think he's a great guy to use for that. One correction I have is that he actually did play 100% of the snaps with the starters. The reason he didn't because they took the starters out, I believe.
There you go.
It might not be 100. I'm making a guess, but he played the exact same number of snaps as Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks, who was the other starter there. So I'm assuming it had to do with that. But what you're correct about and what you pointed out is that he only had 27 air yards on these 5 targets, right? So he only had 10% of the team's air yards. He's going to be a short area weapon who's going to take a backseat to Musgrave, to Watson, possibly to Jaden Reed, who also had 5 targets, and he had 93 air yards. So I think he's the 4th option, really 5th option when you factor in Aaron Jones. I agree that Romeo Doubs is definitely a sell.
That's a good call out. I don't watch the games. I'm a fraud, and so I didn't know that. No,
I did not watch that game. I certainly not the second half. So yeah, I don't blame you.
Just kidding. But I was looking at the numbers, and some of them it seemed odd, but I couldn't put it together. But yes, they did pull their starters because the Bears were just a mess.
Oh, so bad.
Yeah, so definitely not a guy that I'm holding on to. Anybody else we should be pumping the brakes on?
No, I think we pretty much covered it at this point.
Sweet. Cool. So we're going to move on to probably our longest segment here, but we're going to try to kind of do it rapid fire. And that's what I'm calling the panic meter. So we had a lot, and I mean a lot of bad performances in week 1. I don't even have all of them here on my list, but I've put down a lot of the high profile busts from week 1, and we're going to run through them. We're both going to give a number, scale of 1 to 10. How worried are we season long about these slow starts? And we're going to try to start with some easy ones. And I'm going to hit you with Joe Burrow, who was the QB 31 in fantasy points in week 1. What's your panic meter on Burrow? 1 being nothing at all, and 10 being the sky is falling.
Yeah, 0 or 1. Yeah, nothing.
Yeah. I'm going 1 as well.
Yeah, he was injured. He didn't play in preseason. He had a really bad week 1 last year. It just doesn't matter.
He's also Joe Burrow. So I think it's going to be fine. And his teammate T. Higgins, who had 8 targets and 0 catches in week 1. Panic level on Burrow. All right, on Higgins.
0. He's 2023's Devonta Smith. It's no problem at all. I think he had like 150 air yards or something. I'm not worried about T. Higgins.
Yeah, I mean, when you get 8 targets in a game, that's a good thing. It's not his fault that some of them weren't catchable or whatever. Like, he'll catch the targets. I'm at a 1 on Burrow and Higgins. The Bengals offense should be fine.
Yeah.
Just weird stuff happens sometimes, especially when they play Cleveland. I feel like every Browns game is just weird stuff happening.
Yeah, and they've lost 6 out of 7, and I believe have only gone over 20 points once in the last 7 games against Cleveland.
So Cleveland has their number. Better days ahead for those guys. If there's any kind of a dip, I mean, you need to jump on that, but probably not. Jumping to a more concerning offense, where are we at with Kyle Pitts?
Like a 5. I think that Kyle Pitts is. I have no concern about the talent, but I do have concern about the offense. I have concern about Arthur Smith and Desmond Ridder. Listen, like Dynasty, maybe a 2, but redraft, it's more like a 7 or 8. So that's how I get to the 5.
Yes. Yeah. I actually put 5 as well. And my thought process here with this game is like the numbers are kind of our panic level for their season long projections or like how they look rest of the season, but we can apply that obviously to how we would handle them in Dynasty. So we're right there. I also had 5. Pitts had 2 catches for 44 yards. He ran 78% of the routes. We pointed out this was a really weird, like super low volume game. The Falcons, with the way that they play, they could be towards the bottom of the league in plays per game, but they are going to be higher than this most weeks. And they're also not going to throw over 50% of their passes to running backs. I don't think that's not sustainable over a full season. So I think better days are ahead. He still plays a scarce position where most of the other players also aren't scoring a lot of points. So I'm still totally in Dynasty. I'm still optimistic that he could have some big games this season as well, but definitely cause for concern with just how the offense is operating. The other main pass catcher in this offense, I'm a little bit more concerned about. Drake London. He played 90% of the snaps. He had 1 target, 0 catches. Desmond Ridder actually had more catches than Drake London in this game. Where are you at with him?
Yeah, and Arthur Smith doesn't care at all that Desmond Ridder had more catches than Drake London, which is an issue for London, of course. I just want to remind people that London had 70 or more yards in 4 out of his last 5 games last season with Desmond Ridder at quarterback. There is some upside there for seasonal, but I am pretty out on him at this point in redraft. I wasn't that high on him to begin with. I had him outside my top 24 receivers in redraft. I had him projected for 80 catches for like 900 yards. I think that might even be slightly optimistic now, just because this offense is just terrible. I'm still buying in Dynasty, but again, you got to hope that the offense changes and that the quarterback changes.
Yeah. So give me a number.
I'll say 6.
Okay. I'm actually higher. I'm at an 8. I'm on an 8 on London. That's probably a little bit aggressive. My issue with him, again, looking at it from a seasonal perspective, is just he's going to have a really hard time paying off his ADP at a much more crowded position than Kyle Pitts, where like Kyle Pitts, like, yes, he might struggle, but like almost all the tight ends suck. Whereas London is going around a bunch of wide receivers who are going to score a lot more points than him. And so like, you're suffering a lot more for passing on those guys and taking London. And so I'm very worried, just not about the talent. I'm still going to buy low in Dynasty, especially, I mean, he's going to be on 100% of my tanking teams, I think, by the time the season is over, especially if this keeps up. But for expecting this season, like expectations this season, I don't know how you can even play him next week. So
no, I wouldn't. I'd probably have him outside my top 40. So yeah, like wide receivers.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tough spot.
Yeah, so that's a rough scene for London. Gonna do better than 0 receptions. Probably as soon as next week. I'm sure that he'll get the ball more than that. He had high target shares last year. Somehow didn't work out that way this week. You know, the 1 target was weird, but again, 1 week sample. We have a tendency to overreact to these things. Next guy is Rachaad White for the Buccaneers. He played a lot of the snaps, so that seems good. He had a handle on the backfield. He just did not perform in this game. He had under 7 PPR points. Where's your panic level on Rachaad White, if at all?
I'm pretty panicked, actually. I'm going to go with a 9. I think it's becoming abundantly clear that Rachaad White is a bad player. And I know that volume matters, but volume is not promised, especially a running back. Rachaad White had negative 38 rush yards over expectation, which would have been the 4th worst game in all of 2022. That was after being the 2nd to worst running back, ahead of only Leonard Fournette last year in that given stat. Now, the interior O-line is an absolute mess in Tampa, but unless Rachaad White's going to get, 6 dump offs a game, I don't see him being particularly useful, and I think he could lose the job.
See, just a young Mike Davis.
Yeah, I think he's probably just bad. Like it sucks.
Yeah,
Also not that young.
that's
Like
true.
he's
That's true.
I would say inexperienced Mike Davis, but I think he turns 25 in like February or something. Like he's not that
Yeah,
young.
he was a really old rookie. I had
Yeah.
him at a 5, but I had a feeling that might be too low. That volume's not going to hold out forever. If he performs this way. So, and even if it does, if he's going to do this with it every week, then it's not going to matter. So, definitely a bad scene right now for White. Not a guy I want to hold in Dynasty at all. If you still have shares, maybe you can still get out before the boat sinks entirely, but not you don't want to be holding untalented running backs just based on volume at the opportunity cost that White is at.
Yeah,
Um,
I was actually going over this question with a friend today. Nico Collins or Rashad White?
uh, I'll still take White just based on the position. But I mean, in a couple of weeks, that might be wrong. So I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know how bought in I am on the high end upside for Nico. So he's just not like a guy that I feel I'm not afraid of missing out on him. Is kind of my thing. But
that's fair.
I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Next guy is Justin Fields, who I touched on earlier. He really struggled against the Packers. He finished as the QB 16 on the week, which is not terrible, especially compared to somebody like Joe Burrow. That's the power of rushing. Even when you absolutely suck, you could still be a QB2, and that's why we like rushing quarterbacks. But he was outdueled by Jordan Love, and I think he really needs to improve his play in order to maintain his lofty dynasty value. So I'm kind of panicked on Fields. I think I'm at about a 6. I guess that's more influenced in Dynasty. For seasonal, I guess I would say more like a 3 or a 4 because I still think he's going to score you those points. But I am very worried that if he keeps scoring points in an ugly way that like this, his value is just going to start dropping down in Dynasty.
Yeah, I'm gonna go higher. I'll probably say an 8, just given what his dynasty value is currently at. I mean, he looked really bad again. He was trying to play differently. He was checking down a lot. His average depth of target was only 3.6 yards, and this is after it was 9.5 last season. And they added DJ Moore and a full off season of Chase Claypool. I think Justin Fields might suck, and that's why
Yeah.
it's an 8 because
Well,
he's 8th overall in startup ADP. So you can't suck.
yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I think he's probably still going to give you QB1 production, even if he does
Me
suck.
too. Me too.
But yeah, it's just it becomes difficult to kind of weigh how you want to handle him, right? Like, let's say you're a contending team, you have Justin Fields. You've already, I'm in this position, so I'm just gonna be honest. I'm asking for a friend, and the friend is me. If you have Justin Fields on a contending team, you've already knocked on the door of the Trevor Lawrence manager, the Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen. None of them are willing to trade down to Justin Fields. So you want to contend, you want to score points at quarterback, but you also don't necessarily want to call holding the bag on Fields. I mean, what is the play?
So that's the issue at quarterback, right? Is that all of the ones who are scoring points are young. To me, the play is Anthony Richardson or Tua Tagovailoa. I think the
Yeah.
play is actually Tua. If you can get a first on top of Fields for Tua, I'm doing that.
So I tried to trade into Richardson. I tried to mask it a little bit with like two other positional players and act like I was trading down to Richardson
Yeah.
in order to get an upgrade. And that did not fly. He said he wants Richardson straight up over Fields, and I said, I respect you, sir, but I do not like you. And then he tried to send me Tua more or less straight up for Fields, and it's a 4-point passing touchdown league, so I wasn't really comfortable with that. But I don't know. It feels like the kind of thing I could come to regret.
Yeah. I don't blame you, actually. I would keep Fields over Tua for now if it's going to be straight up. I think Fields has a high enough rushing floor at this point that you'll be able to find someone. He'll have a good week or two at some point. DJ Moore will break off an 80-yard play, but I'm nervous. I'm nervous.
Yeah. So definitely cause for concern. Let's watch him and hope maybe he can have some better games down the road. The Packers do have a good defense, and DJ Moore was getting the Jair Alexander treatment. So could be better days ahead, but I'm not super optimistic. Another rushing quarterback coming up here who, if it's possible, had a worse game than Justin Fields, and that's Daniel Jones, who, I mean, he was under constant attack from the Dallas defense. You can't really put all of this on Daniel Jones. I mean, their line could not block to save their lives. Just nothing was working for the Giants offense. I frankly, I don't think I can remember a game where more things went wrong for a team in a single half of football. It was like blocked kick, pick six, fumble, There were like penalties being called at like horrible times. It was a disaster for the Giants. But where are you at with Daniel Jones specifically?
My panic level is 0 because that's how many shares I own. If you like him, your panic level should be 10.
Yeah.
Daniel Jones, we talked about earlier in the offseason how he was one of the most overvalued players. This shows why. He's just not a very good player. The rushing production is nice, but I don't think he's a long-term starter in the league.
Yeah, I've been fighting this fight all offseason that Daniel Jones was overvalued. He wasn't really very good last year. He didn't even really improve on
No.
anything other than turnovers. He basically was the same quarterback he's always been, but he ran a little bit more. He overperformed in rushing touchdowns, and he was way below expectation in turnovers. But all that stuff was always going to regress, and now you can see that it's regressing. And he's not really developed as a passer, and they didn't really get him any weapons other than an aging Darren Waller. So he wasn't necessarily set up for success, but we obviously have to take that into account in Dynasty, and he has been overpriced, and I think his price is going to be coming down with performances like this.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. His big time throw rate last year was 1.4%. That was second to last in the league, ahead of only Matt Ryan, and it was more than twice as bad as fourth to worst in the league. So he just doesn't make big throws. Like he's not a
right,
very good quarterback. I don't know.
yeah, so not a guy you want to be holding on to. That's a sinking ship as well. My next guy, I'm not quite as worried about. It's Dallas Goddard. He went 0 catches on 1 target. He had the Drake London stat line for the Eagles this week. I mean, this was always part of what you're signing up for with Dallas Goddard. Like he is the third target in the offense. Um, and so sometimes you're going to have these bust games where you're just not really a focal point. But in this tight end landscape, like you can still start him every week. He's going to have big games. I don't know if the Patriots are like specifically a good defense against tight ends, but they do have a good defense. And I think better games are ahead for Goddard. So I'm at like a 2 basically
Yeah,
with Goddard.
they are specifically a very good defense against tight ends. Kyle Duggar has been very good. Jabril Peppers played a hybrid role. Jawan Bentley is, the captain of the defense and played very well. I'm a 0 for Dallas Goddard. I don't care.
Yeah.
Tight ends have shitty games sometimes.
Yeah, and I know you already think that he's overvalued in Dynasty, but
Yeah.
this isn't the kind of thing that's like, oh my gosh, he's not good anymore. He's not going to be part of the offense. Like nothing has changed. This is just a 1 week anomaly. So he's
Yeah, I
fine.
think he's overvalued because I don't think he has any ceiling, but this game does not change my opinion of him at all.
Yeah, exactly, as it shouldn't. This next guy, another running back who look, I was not high on Cam Akers, but I did not think that they were just going to make 474 Kyron Williams the starter. That was one of my bigger surprises of the week. I mean,
Yeah.
Kyron Williams outsnapped Akers in the first half like 26-4. He wasn't the third down back. He wasn't the change of pace back. He was just the starter. Cam Akers was back in Sean McVay's doghouse again. And he ended up with 22 carries, but that was only because they were blowing out the Seahawks, and he was the guy they put in to just salt the game away. So I'm at like a 9 on Akers, or even a 10, I guess. I didn't put 10 for anybody, but if I did put one, it would be Akers. My only thing is like, who knows? Next week he could be the bell cow. I cannot figure out what Sean McVay's thinking at any point.
Yeah, I think he's Rashad White, but he might have already lost the job. I'm right there with you, 9, 10, whatever. I think Akers is probably bad, and I think Sean McVay doesn't trust him.
Yeah, and this show is going to drop after your waivers have already run, but Kyron Williams is a guy you got to, if he's still sitting on waivers, like you have to go pay up for him.
Yeah.
And again, this is useless information because you're not going to hear it, but hopefully you paid up for Kyron Williams because you're going to be able to start him. He's basically going to be like your arbitrage Rashad White at this point, where he's going to get a bunch of touches and probably be bad on them. And that's fine. You can stick him in your flex or whatever if you need a running back. So
I got a spontaneous trade question for you real quick, just
yes.
because we were just talking about Daniel Jones.
Okay.
I'm being offered Daniel Jones for an early second round pick.
I'll take Jones. I'll still take Jones.
Okay. I have never bought Jones before, but this is a live negotiation going on right now. So I think I got to do it.
Yeah, I definitely think I would still do that because he does have some level of job security. And I do think
contract.
Yeah, and I still think he's going to give you games. Like I still think he could easily average like 16, 17 points per game. And he's still young, he's still mobile. Like he's not going to ever have a ceiling, but when you're paying an early second, I don't think he really needs to have a ceiling. Like you'd probably pay an early second for, I don't know,
Will
Geno Smith
Levis
or
this
Jared
year,
Goff or
right?
whatever.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Kendre Miller, Will Levis, like those were your early seconds. I don't think that you're giving up a lot there. So
All right, cool.
I'd buy him.
Appreciate it.
I would not trade an early second for Ryan Tannehill, who is my next guy on this list. He had, oh my gosh, like the worst game. He was under 50% completions. He threw 3 interceptions against the Saints. It seems like he could be going full Matt Ryan on us this season. I'm at like a 9 on Tannehill, especially because they do have Malik Willis and Will Levis sitting back there. And if they're not going to be winning games, they don't really have any reason to play Ryan Tannehill. So how do you feel about him after week 1?
He looked so bad. I think the Titans are actually an okay team, but you're completely right. They got to give a chance to Willis or Levis. I'm pretty worried about Tannehill. He's so cheap in Dynasty. It's not, the opportunity cost isn't that big, but yeah, I'll say a 7.
Well, the opportunity cost for me, well, opportunity cost isn't the right word, but the stakes are high for me where I have him as my QB3 on like a bunch of teams where I'm
Yeah,
like, this is a guy that I should be able to play for bye weeks or whatever. And now it's like, do I start Ryan Tannehill or Josh Dobbs? And I don't know. So I hope that he can at least hold on to the job. I don't know. It's hard to imagine that he's just completely lost it at the like overnight because he has been like a good quarterback for the last several years, but when it goes, it goes. And he is deceptively old. He's like 35, 36 already. So he could be over at this point. I'm at like a 9 on Tannehill.
You skipped one guy I was really looking forward to talking about, which was Christian Kirk.
I'm gonna go back to him.
Got it.
I just, that segue of the Daniel Jones trade just had me on quarterbacks, and I did that.
Sure.
But Christian Kirk will be my next guy here, who he doesn't look like the wide receiver 2 anymore for the Jaguars. There was discussion this offseason, like, is Calvin Ridley going to be the wide receiver 1 or is it Christian Kirk? He was really good last year. If you look at total points, he was a wide receiver 1. He's not even the wide receiver 2. He lost that to Zay Jones. He only played 60% of the snaps. He came off on the 2 wide receiver sets. He ended up with 1 catch for 9 yards in a game where the Jags scored 31 points. It's a big yikes for Christian Kirk. I mean, I'm at like an 8 or a 9 based on his price this offseason. I mean, this is a rug pull.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, as you said, he was only on the field for 1 out of the 11 snaps and 2 wide receiver personnel. He'll do better than 1 for 9, but he's in kind of that Tyler Boyd range.
I'd rather have Nico Collins for sure. Yeah,
me too.
And that's actually a trade that you could still potentially get done.
I think you could.
I would, if you have Christian Kirk, I would genuinely look at that kind of a trade because it's not going to get that much better. He's going to be a wide receiver 3 in this offense. So yeah, rough scene for him. We've got one more quarterback on the list, and I think he's my least concern of all the quarterbacks on the list, but I do have an eyebrow raised at Geno Smith. I mean, the Rams secondary was supposed to be terrible. And he threw for like under 130 passing yards in a game that they trailed the whole time with great weapons around him. I don't know. I mean, there's definitely some like turning back into a pumpkin risk with Geno. I'm not quite there yet, but this is a poor first showing, and I'm probably at like a 3 on the panic meter.
Yeah, I was incredibly high on Geno Smith coming into the year. To be honest, I need to watch the game because the numbers were terrible, but I did not watch every play of that game. So I need to go back and see what exactly went wrong, especially in the second half, where I think the Seattle Seahawks had like 6 yards or something in the second half. So I got to go back and watch and figure it out. For now, I'm going to say a 2 or 3. People have bad games. All of the Josh Allen played poorly.
Josh Allen lost to Zach Wilson last night.
Yeah, Joe Burrow played poorly. I don't think Jalen Hurts played that great, but I'm not that worried about Geno Smith yet.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to do anything drastic based off of this. I'm not going to be trying to sell him or anything like that. We'll just wait and see what happens. Maybe their offense was falling apart because they were targeting Kenneth Walker, and they should just stop doing that. No, I'm just kidding. It's not his fault, but something has to give. I mean, he has Metcalf, Lockett, and JSN. They should be able to make something work with the offense, especially against the defense that was not supposed to be too imposing this season.
You think so?
Yeah, it's weird. But again, I feel like these divisional matchups, like Rams Seahawks, is always a weird game. I don't know. I honestly struggle to draw too many conclusions from divisional games because there are so many of these rivalries that like have no resemblance to how these teams function in other games.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Especially week 1.
All right. Last guy is a guy that I famously, and when I say famously, I mean not famously at all, compared to a Dunkin' Donuts gift card in my last episode of this podcast, which is Najee Harris. If you didn't see that bonus clip, I got Billy to laugh pretty hard at that, and it's over on the YouTube channel. But Najee Harris was not a guy I was high on. I have no dynasty shares. I have no best ball shares. I literally have not touched him with a 10-foot pole. There was talks that he was going to split work with Jalen Warren heading into week one, and the split was even closer than I would have anticipated. Warren actually had a higher share of the running back opportunities. Harris edged him out in snaps and route percentage, but it was fairly close, and Warren did get a lot more targets than Najee Harris. I'm at a full 10 on Harris. I mean, the sky is falling. It is bad news for him.
Yeah, and he's been a very inefficient player for a while. It's tough because that was such a weird game. It was another disaster game for the Steelers, and it's hard to take that much away from a blowout. But there were reports going into the game that Najee and Warren would split time. That's kind of been my expectation all season. And I think we're going to get to this, but I think that the Steelers offense is going to be absolutely terrible this season, and Najee needs touchdowns to be successful. I'm going to go with I'll go with a 9 just because I think it was a weird game, but yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at all the signals. You look at last year, right? Like going into his second year, Najee came way down in snaps. Warren ramped up as the season went along. All offseason, they've talked about getting Warren involved more. Then we have this report that they're going to split work. And then we have the fact that Najee has just been inefficient, continues to be inefficient. Warren then comes out and actually does get that extra work. And then you throw in the fact that this is also a terrible offense. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. Tell me the difference between Najee Harris and Rachaad White at this point. Like, except for the fact that Harris has better competition in his backfield. I'm just not sure that there's a big difference there.
I'm not sure there's a big difference there either. And I posted the other day, Najee Harris, a random 2024 first, and the first one 87% to 13%. So you can get a second for Najee Harris, but that's it. So I think he's closer to Rachaad White than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd hold him for a second.
Me too.
Personally. Me too. But yeah, for that 13%, please go send him away for a first, wherever you can. It's not going to be fun. He's not going to just volume his way to an RB4 finish. Like, this is a touchdown dependent RB2 type of play, it looks like, for the rest of the year. So
yep.
Ugly stuff. That is our panic meter segment. If there's anybody off the top of your head that we need to throw in here that you can think of, I'm totally down to do it a couple extra because we are on schedule and we're not running way behind. But
none come to the top of my head immediately.
Yeah, those really were the marquee.
Actually, I have one, and this might be a good segue into our next segment. Let's talk about Kenny Pickett, because I think my panic meter for Kenny Pickett is a 10. He was arguably the worst NFL quarterback last year. He had the second worst touchdown rate of any player since 2000. He was 38th out of 41 quarterbacks in yards per attempt. And he was absolutely terrible last year. Last week, he had 230 yards on 52 dropbacks, 0 big time throws yet again. I think Kenny Pickett is absolutely terrible. I don't think he's a starting quarterback. I think he's going to destroy the Steelers offense.
Yeah. I mean, this is another one of those where it's like 0 for me, but 10 for all the stands, right? I have one Pickett share and I got him in the auction that we did, and he was like $5 or something because there was nobody had any money left.
Yeah, you overpaid.
I overpaid. I should have picked up Kyron Williams instead with that $5. But yeah, I mean, you can't feel any kind of optimism. It's like the Fields thing, but way worse because he doesn't score as many points and he also has like fewer redeeming qualities, but you really wanted to see some growth from him in the first game, and we did not see that. Now Deontay's going to be out. I mean, he's going to have Calvin Austin and Allen Robinson on the field running routes. That's not a good thing for any quarterback. So it's really bad. Luckily, I'm not very invested in this offense because I didn't think it was going to be very good. I wasn't a Pickens believer. I wasn't a Harris believer. I have a couple Deontay's and I have Jalen Warren super cheap, but I can kind of just wash my hands of the Steelers, and I think that's what people are going to want to do.
Yep, I agree there. I have a lot of Jalen Warren and some Pat Freiermuth, but otherwise, yeah, same page.
Yeah, and you called this. I mean, you had a tweet a little while ago about how you thought you had projected the Steelers as, what was it, a bottom 5 or was it bottom 3 offense?
I had them 30th in points scored this year.
Yeah, and that got some pushback if I remember correctly, but I mean that looks like the kind of thing that could easily happen, especially now with Deontay out. The way Pickett has struggled. I mean, this does not look like an offense that is going to be imposing its will on opposing defenses this season. So um, I think this is just a situation where you want to get out while you can on any of these Steelers players. Deontay's going to be a tough one because he's hurt. You probably are going to just have to hold on to him. But I would definitely be shopping Pickens and Dynasty, Harris and Dynasty. Sell a little bit low if you have to, because the value is going to continue to drop if this team can't put points on the board.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right, we're going to get to some other big takeaways, just sort of cleaning up anything we missed. I promised we would talk about him, so I have to ask you, is Puka Nacua real? Is this a real thing that's happening right now?
It is more real than Travis Fulgham, but I'm not going. So it's not Antonio Brown. Like, listen, he had really good metrics in college. I think he looked very good. He's filling in for Cooper Kupp admirably, but the Rams offense is not going to be what it was then. They ran a ton of plays. They were very effective passing the ball, which was pretty surprising. I love seeing it. And if you look at the rookies who got over 10 targets in their first career game, it's a pretty high hit rate. I'm nervous. You tell me. I honestly don't have a very good stance on this.
I was hoping you were going to tell me. No, I listened to JJ Zacharyason's 15 transactions, and he was pretty high on him. He talked about how he had an underrated prospect profile. And you just don't get this type of target share by accident. He also was playing outside a lot. So even when Cooper Kupp comes back, they should be able to coexist to an extent in this offense. It seems like it'll be him with him on the outside with Tutu, and then Kupp operating, mostly out of the slot as he does. So I'm inclined to say it's real. I've seen a lot of talk of like trading future seconds for Puka. I'm still pretty hesitant on that. Maybe like a 25 second. I'd be on the fence about. Is that a bridge too far for you?
Yeah, I'm not paying a second for him at all, really. Yeah, no, I'm not paying a second for him. I need to see another week or two. And the thing is, I don't think he's going to get cheaper as long as Cooper Kupp's out, because I think he's going to keep getting 10 targets a week.
Yeah, I mean, well, that might be an argument to buy in. Would you trade Demario Douglas and a third for him?
No, I wouldn't trade Demario Douglas for him, but I know I'm irrational on that.
At least you know.
Yeah, I know. I would trade Rashid Shaheed in a third for him, if that gives you an idea. But
Fair
for
enough.
instance, I would keep Romeo. I think I would take Puka over Romeo Doubs.
Take the ceiling, right? I mean,
exactly.
Is Romeo Doubs ever going to have 14 targets in a game? I mean, I don't think so. Probably not. Yeah, I tried to trade Sky Moore for him straight up in a league, and that ship has sailed. Let me tell you, that is not happening. So
yeah, I mean, looking at like wide receiver 45 is like Rashad Bateman, Josh Downs, Gabe Davis. I would put him after that. Right. Maybe around the Cortland Sutton, Brandon Cooks range. So kind of early third, something like that.
Oh, go and trade Cortland Sutton right now. That dude sucks. Jerry Jeudy was out. It's supposed to be his time to shine. He's got a 15% target share. I mean, come on, man. Adam Troutman's out here running routes and you can't get targeted. I don't know. It's bad.
He's just Kenny Galladay. Kenny Galladay.
He's Kenny Galladay. He's
one good
he's
season.
Not. So I would trade Cortland Sutton for Puka Nacua right now. Full stop. I did notice when I was looking up that first read stuff that Puka was 6th in first read target percentage, which actually, if you think of Cooper Kupp coming back and how the offense is going to change, I guess that could be a bad thing for him. Like, because he's not going to maintain that first read percentage. So then the question becomes like, is he going to be able to get open, I guess, more traditionally and like be there when Stafford gets off his first read to get to Puka? I don't know how that's going to change the dynamic of like his contributions to the offense, but I thought that was interesting.
I think the answer is it's going to change it a goddamn lot.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. He's not going to have a 46% target share when Kupp gets back is what you're saying.
Yeah.
But he seems to be a good player. And that's obviously what we care about first and foremost. We don't even know for sure if Kupp will be back week 5. He could re-aggravate and be out for longer. And then you get a full season of this. So we do want to lean into talent first and foremost. Zoltan is officially team less than a second. I think still there, but I wouldn't kill you if you traded like a 25 second for him. I think that's okay to do, especially if your team has like surplus value.
Yeah, I wouldn't kill you, but like I need to know that it's late, because if that ends up being a 202, then I mean you could have got Daniel Jones apparently. So yeah, no, I need to know that it's late.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. Okay, we're gonna close the show out today on I guess kind of a sad note. Maybe we should have sandwiched this in the middle, but we do have to touch on some big injuries and how they affect the dynasty landscape. The one that broke my heart the most was J.K. Dobbins, who looked like he was finally on his way to do the things that J.K. Dobbins was supposed to do. He had a touchdown, he had 2 receptions when he was injured early in the game. Turned out to be a torn Achilles. I was very into him as a player this year. Now, I mean, his career is more or less over. He's ending his rookie contract, and he's going to be out for this whole year and probably hobbled next year. So it's really sad. Now we have this gross committee with Justice Hill and Gus
Yeah.
Edwards, but how do we work this whole thing out?
So, I mean, I'm taking Gus Edwards over Justice Hill. I don't think Justice Hill can stand up to the volume. He's never had that type of volume. Gus Edwards has averaged over 5 yards a carry throughout his career. With Lamar Jackson, I could see him rushing for 60 yards and a touchdown quite often. To be honest, I'm not particularly interested in either, except if they're just sitting on waivers in a dynasty league. As far as it goes for J.K. Dobbins, I mean, it sucks, but he's just worthless now. Like there's there's not a path really back to him being super valuable because, like you said, his contract's up. He's gonna spend another year recovering. He's really only had like 8 good games. It sucks. It just
Yeah.
sucks.
Unfortunately, like I said, we're gonna miss the waiver window with this show. So Justice Hill's gonna be picked up. I've been bidding on him, not overly aggressively, but I've been putting like 30% of my budget on him. I don't know if that's aggressive. I mean, in deep dynasty leagues, there's not that much stuff that comes up. So I'm kind of comfortable pushing in on a guy that I think
Oh,
could have a big role.
in a deep dynasty league, I just actually put out my waiver wire column for
Mhm.
my patrons. In a deep dynasty league, I'm fine throwing as much as you want on him. There's just
Yeah.
it's not often you get a potential starting running
Well,
back.
I have to
So
save some money for Durham Smythe, so I can't put all of it on Justice Hill. 7 targets for Mr. Smythe. He's actually the second read over Jalen Waddle now. So um,
100% snap share for Durham Smythe.
I actually am bidding on him, like unironically. I think,
Oh, me too. I mean,
yeah,
he's their tight. He's a tight end one there. Like you
on a
absolutely have
great
to.
offense. Yeah, I mean, I might actually up some of my bids. I now that I think about it, but especially in like my best balls and stuff, where like I don't even have to like put him in my lineup. It's very very appealing. But yeah, with Justice Hill, I don't expect a whole lot, but it's just like these are the opportunities you have to bid, and you just see what happens. Gus Edwards is already rostered in Dynasty. I would not trade for him. I also wouldn't be bidding on Melvin Gordon. I don't care if they say he's going to be involved. He's not good at all. And I don't think he's ever going to be a guy to play. But the fact that you have a dynasty waiver column on your Patreon is a good thing to call out. So if you guys want to go check that out, you'll know next week and all the weeks after that if there's anybody worth bidding on, because this show's never going to be out in time for you to place your bid. So you got to find your columns elsewhere. We also have a dynasty waiver column on Dynasty Football Factory. Super cheap subscription available for that as well. So those are your resources moving forward for waiver claims. Anything else you want to say about the Ravens backfield before we move on to this next one?
No, not really.
No, I don't want to talk about it. I'm actually still very sad for
I'm pretty
Dobbins.
sad too. It just sucks.
I didn't have a ton of dynasty. I had like 13 or 14% in best ball. And so that's sad, but I'm also just really sad for him because I think he was a really good player. And now he's never going to get that payday that he could have gotten. But anyway, the next injury was even more jaw-dropping, heart-stopping, and that was Aaron Rodgers. Monday Night Football doesn't even get a chance to complete a pass for the New York Jets. Achilles rupture or tear, I don't know the difference, but he's out for the season. He's done. It's Zach Wilson time once again in New York. What do we make of this?
Oh, I mean, I didn't own a lot of Aaron Rodgers. I've never been his biggest fan. But it's really, really sucks because the Jets look really good other than the quarterback position. We talked about Breece Hall earlier. Their offensive line looks awful. I can say that. But to me, the biggest takeaway from a dynasty perspective, it's about Zach Wilson, who, if you get a second round pick, sell him. And it's about Garrett Wilson, who we talked about moving Olave potentially above him. I actually just saw about 10 minutes ago Garrett Wilson for T. Higgins straight up, which was shocking to me. I wouldn't be going and doing that. But
No.
listen, a lot of the argument for Garrett Wilson was he's getting this quarterback upgrade. I was never really into that because I thought it would only last for a year, and now it might not ever happen. So the Jets don't have their second round pick next year. They will have their first round pick. I think they'll be too good to get a top 10 pick. It's going to be a long path for Garrett Wilson to get a good quarterback.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I don't have Rodgers, but I have a lot of Hall and I have a lot of Wilson, and so I mean, it really hurts the ceiling. I think for those guys, they can get the volume, but if they don't have a good, captain of the ship, I mean, they're just not going to be an efficient offense. We saw last year with Garrett Wilson, playing with Zach Wilson, it was ugly a lot of the time. So it's a bummer. You have to just hope that the Jets are in on this season and maybe they can pull off a move for another quarterback. My dream is Jameis Winston. I don't think that it's realistic. I don't think the NFL views him quite the way that I do, but I would love to see somebody like that in New York. I saw somebody say like the Jets should trade for Kyler Murray. That would be insane. But I think unfortunately it's going to be like a Zach Wilson, Carson Wentz platoon in a couple of weeks, and we're all going to be very sad.
Yeah, I want Dorian Thompson-Robinson there, but I think you're probably right.
That would be fun. But what about Aaron Rodgers in Dynasty? I mean, he's 40 and he tore his Achilles. Like, is there any value left?
Yeah, there can be. I mean, he can be what you have as Ryan Tannehill next year. I mean, I would trade a random third for him because the odds of a random third cashing is nothing. And if Aaron Rodgers can put up 18 fantasy points for another season, that's fine. You can stash him on IR, so you also get a free roster spot. I think that's fine.
I didn't do any research on this, but are there examples of quarterbacks suffering Achilles and like what the timeline is? Do you have any memories of anybody off the top of your head that this happened to?
I really don't have any off the top of my head. I don't think it's a particularly common injury for quarterbacks, and there's definitely no examples of a 40-year-old because there's only like 3 examples of a 40-year-old quarterback. So
right.
I think given his competitiveness and given his contract, I imagine he plays next year. But listen, it's Aaron Rodgers. I'm not going to of all the psychological analysis I can try to do on people, I'm not going to try to do it on Rodgers.
That is fair. We don't know for sure. He could just disappear into South America and never be heard from again. We really don't know. But I like your take. I think that it makes a lot of sense to send a late third or something if you can get him for that, because the payoff could be much higher. Super flex quarterbacks are a hot commodity, and there's only 32 starters in a given season. If he's one of them, that's going to be probably a good investment. So a little more optimism there than with Dobbins, who plays a position of less scarcity, a position where he's more easily replaced. He's not owed any money. And it's also harder to come back, I think, from an Achilles when you have to do the kind of things that running backs do. Just that seems logical. So willing to take a cheap shot on Rodgers. The only other 2 injuries that I have down here were both hamstrings. Apparently, like every skill player in the NFL has a hamstring injury this year. Maybe they should, I don't know, stretch before the games, but Deontay Johnson and Greg Dulcich are both expected to miss a few weeks with hamstring injuries. We already talked about the Steelers offense. That's a nightmare. I personally would not even try buying. I don't necessarily think I would even be buying Deontay. Maybe you have a different take on that, but it's just like, what do I win, I guess, with Deontay, even if I do buy him at a slight discount?
I think you could get a big discount is the only thing that you might win. I mean, he was already going pretty cheap. I know he had a little bit of boost to his value late in the offseason, but I think you might be able to get him really cheap, and he's still a good player. He's still an accomplished target earner. I'm a little bit interested in Deontay Johnson, and I'm very interested in Greg Dulcich.
Yes, definitely on Dulcich. With Deontay, would you trade I'm just trying to think who's even a guy in that range that would be.
I'm trying to I think Romeo Dobbs. Something like that could work. I mean, looking at startup ADP, which obviously hasn't updated recently, Deontay Johnson was going at the end of the 8th round. Let's say he got moved down a little bit. That means you could trade Gabe Davis for him, Rashad Bateman, maybe Rashee Rice. I would do all those.
Rice is interesting. Yeah. I mean, those other 2 guys didn't really have good games in week 1. No. But yeah, Rice could be interesting even if you have to put a little plus on top. That's something I could see doing.
You know who I would do? Elijah Moore.
Would you though? I mean, come on, man. 24% target share.
Those targets were all at the line of scrimmage. Yeah. He had a 1.0 yards per route run last year. I would do that. I don't think I would have to. I think Elijah's probably valued more than Deontay. I think you get a plus there, but I do value Deontay higher.
I think you're right there. I think that's the smart move, even though it's probably going to be really gross when he comes back. But he's not like a super old wide receiver, and he can still give you like low end wide receiver 2 production this year, and maybe things get better. That's probably the sharp move. With Dulcich, I'm definitely buying low because I think he was already dropping in value, and now it's like he could be super cheap now with this injury, and he's only going to miss a few weeks. He's probably not your starting tight end anyway. He's a guy you can stash. Um, I would try to send either like Hunter Henry or Hayden Hurst and something small for Dulcich. Like I think you could genuinely get that done, especially if somebody was using Dulcich or like needs tight end help, because those guys scored well. They're super boring, but they have roles, and you can just stash Dulcich till he's back, and you can hold on to that upside.
Yeah, those are your 2 top scoring tight ends this season. I actually acquired Greg Dulcich about 2 hours ago, straight up from Michael Thomas in a half tight end premium league.
There you go. Yeah,
Just
I
to give
mean
you an example.
he's still a really good player. Um, we don't get to see now how it all shakes out with Troutman. I think when he left the game, they both had 2 catches. I have no idea what his route participation looked like to that point. I'm not even sure how to find out, but he was involved. We know Sutton is kind of a nothing. Marvin Mims wasn't overly impressive in his first game. Judy, we don't know when he'll be healthy, so there could still be room for Dulcich when he gets back. He's still young, and he's still a guy that we both like. So could
Though
be
I
a
will say that Judy is practicing today for what it's worth. By the way, real quick to circle back to our earlier discussion, posted a poll Fields versus Tua. Tua is currently winning it.
I'm not surprised that he's winning it. I mean, he threw for 450 yards this week.
That's a mistake. I mean, I'm super high on Tua. I said he could throw for 5,000 yards this season.
Yeah.
Justin Fields could put up 26 fantasy points a game. Tua's not doing that. I would still
Yeah,
take Fields.
no, I think it's wrong. I would still take Fields over Tua in Dynasty because it's a ceiling thing. But I'm not surprised by the results of the poll, and it's definitely closer than it was based on startup ADP this offseason. Like Fields was going too high, Tua was going too low, but I would still take Fields. You can't really project Tua to ever really have like a fantasy breaking type of season. So it's just hard to really get up there. But I think the real arbitrage was something you pointed out that I was really slow to react to, which was Tua over Dak was I think something that should have been more of a discussion, and I wasn't really into it, but I totally see it now. It's like it seems so obvious. So good call on that one.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Yeah, coming into the season, I had Tua projected for 4,900 yards and 30 touchdowns. That is still only 19 fantasy points a game because he just doesn't run the football. So that's where it gets a little bit difficult.
Yeah, but Dak doesn't run anymore either, and he's several years older. So I think that would be a good move if you could still get something like that done. Probably not because Dak scored like 8 points this week, but something to look at. Is there anything else that we should talk about before we close out this podcast? I mean, it seems like we talked about every single player in the NFL, but we probably missed a whole bunch of important stuff.
All I'll say is that so I had my eyes on 4 guys coming into the season, 5 guys, sorry, who are in a similar range, these young quarterbacks: Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell, Jordan Love, Kenny Pickett, and Mac Jones. And we saw 2 really good performances from Love and Jones. We saw an awful performance from Pickett. Howell and Ridder is still TBD. I think 2 of these guys are going to have jobs next year and 3 of them won't. And identifying the 2 that will is super important. Love and Mac looked really good. We'll see how they look in the future, but I just wanted to provide a quick status update. And Jordan Love was the one that stood out to me there.
Yeah, I didn't really get to see him play much, but Ben from my site, he was on my show last week. He said that he looked sharp. His decision making looked better. He obviously got the job done against the Bears. And then Mac Jones, I mean, he just threw the ball a ton of times, but he had a lot of nice looking throws for sure. He handled himself well. I think he will have a job next year. I think it's more likely that Love will have a job next year than I thought a couple of weeks ago. And I think maybe one of those other 3 might. Howell would be my pick if the Commanders can just sneak out enough wins to kind of get past this season. But wouldn't surprise me at all if those other 3 guys are out of a job.
Yeah, Mac's a guy we didn't really talk about either, but the interior pass rush of Philly was destroying the backup guards for New England, and Mac did a really good job with his quick passing, moving around a little bit. I thought he looked more like year 1 Mac.
Yeah, it was definitely a good sign. Another guy I got absolutely dirt cheap in that auction draft we did. I have a real stars and scrubs quarterback room. I have Hurts, Purdy, Pickett, and Mac Jones. So I think between those guys, I can piece it together for the year. That's a good call. And is Kendrick Bourne for real? 91% of the snaps, 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I think he's the best receiver on the Patriots, not named Demario. No, I'm sorry, I can't say his name for the third time this podcast. Yes, I think he's for real. I was actually high on Kendrick Bourne going into last season. He had some issues with Matt Patricia. I think he's a talented player, and he's going to keep a job on this team. A lot of it's volume based. I don't think Bourne is going to be reliable, but I think you can flex him, especially once the bye weeks hit. I'm picking him up in dynasty leagues if he's on the waiver wire for sure.
Yeah, he's a guy I love in like a dynasty best ball format.
Yeah.
He was on waivers in a couple. I'm going to bid pretty aggressively on him in those leagues. But even in a managed league, I mean, if he's on waivers, I would pick him up for sure, because when guys are running the routes, they can get targets, and none of the competition there is particularly imposing. I think Devontae Parker died or missed the team bus or something. Did he even have a target in that game? I don't remember even seeing him.
He did not play. He was injured.
But he didn't play. Okay.
No, but that's why you don't remember him. But he is often injured, and he really plays a completely different role than Kendrick Bourne does. So I'm not too worried about that. Parker missed with a knee. He's always got some type of lingering injury.
That's not as funny. I thought he actually played and just didn't do anything. I did not notice that he was out. But
no. Well, that says a lot in and of itself, is that you didn't notice he wasn't playing. So
that's a good point. All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show to help me break down week 1. I was feeling a little overwhelmed. I think we broke it down pretty well, though. I think there's some good actionable points there. Last thing I want to remind everybody is, don't overreact to single game samples, even when they're the first week of the season. Make sure you look at those route statistics. You can find them, some of them on Player Profiler and other sites. And look at the overall volume of the offense. When a team runs 50 plays versus 80 plays, there's going to be a big discrepancy there, but that stuff has a tendency to balance out. Any final thoughts before we get out of here, Mike?
No, man. Thanks for having me on. It was good to talk to you again.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the next time. Maybe I'll be able to jump on your show at some point this season. We always provide the good takes for the people. So you guys out there, thank you so much for listening. If you can, subscribe to the YouTube channel or follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. This show is going to be running all season long, every week. Should be dropping on Thursdays or Fridays throughout the season. I'll have a variety of guests on, like Mike, other analysts from DFF, and we'll just try to break down all the news from each week, give you the best dynasty tips to make sure that you're managing your teams well. If you get the subscription to our site, you also get to join our Discord. So if you have some more specific questions, start sits, trade questions and stuff, all of our guys can handle that stuff in the Discord as well. Mike has a Patreon. What's that Patreon for everybody?
Yeah, it's just patreon.com/Dynasty Zoltan. Definitely check it out. I have the weekly waiver wire column. I have a weekly Dynasty buys and sells where I provide a lot of statistics to back up what I'm talking about. And my favorite thing I do is the Dynasty Diagnostics. Have a huge model, can run through all your teams, tells you what team stage you're at. I give customized trade advice as often as you want it. So yeah, check that out, and check out the Dynasty Zoltan podcast as well.
Yeah, that stuff is really, really cool. Highly recommend. Follow me on Twitter if you don't mind, at Paul_DFF. I like to rage tweet during the games, and sometimes I post things that are funny. So you could follow me. You can follow Mike at Dynasty Zoltan FF as well. He'll post more useful information. But this has been the Factory Tour, guys. I will see you all next week.